thank you all for having me here. I appreciate you inviting me to come and talk about the airport. All right. I appreciate you having me here to come and talk about the airport. This is on, right? Okay. I like to do these things as a conversation instead of me just sitting here chit-chatting at you for 20 minutes or however long it takes. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to raise your hand, ask me questions. We can have this more as a conversation than just as me sitting up here giving you a lecture about the airport. But we did do this. You'll have to forgive me if I get all over the place when I do this too. Lately I've been, well, prior to COVID I was doing one of these about every other week, and but over the last year I've done a few of these, and I think I kind of tend to run them together at times, so what I have to say may not always go along with my slides. But this is based on one that we did a few weeks ago, where we invited all of our public officials and legislatures out to the airport just to talk to them about what's going on, how things are looking, and the challenges we're facing. Obviously, this year we're facing a lot of challenges with COVID. It has significantly impacted our operations and really reduced the number of passengers that have been coming and going through the airport. And of course, the revenue the airport earns and operates from is based on passengers. So that's been a bit of a challenge for us. We've already done the introduction of me. Thank you for that. I think you stole some of that off the website, probably? Probably so. Okay. I never know what people are going to say when they introduce me. I have been around doing this for quite a while. I started when I was 19 years old, like a lot of people that are in my industry, wanting to fly airplanes, realizing that flying airplanes wasn't actually going to make us very much money, and somebody at the airport gave us a job, and we've been working at airports ever since then. And that's what happened to me. I started out at 19. My first job was cleaning bathrooms and doing weather observation. And I can say that I've done pretty much every job there is to operating and running an airport except flying the airplanes commercially. I've flown them privately, but I've not flown them for airlines, and that's pretty much the only thing I haven't done at an airport. I did spend most of my career on the Oregon coast. I lived there for about 22 years. Started young, raised a family very young, kept my kids in the same place. My kids got older, my son went to college, my daughter went off to the Army, and I'm like, I can go anywhere I want now. And so I started moving around, looking at different airports, going to different places. Spent some time in the Midwest, and then have come here and landed here. And I gotta say, this is actually my favorite airport. People always ask me, why do you leave Oregon? Oregon's so beautiful. Believe it or not, this area is actually just as beautiful as where I lived in Oregon. It just doesn't rain as much. And when it rains 9 months out of the year, you usually look for something different. So here I've discovered we get the best of both worlds. We get great, beautiful country, and it doesn't rain 9 months out of the year. So I love it here. Very happy to be in this community. I think this is one of the best communities I've ever lived in as far as support and cooperation and being able to do the things that you need to do to run an airport. Running an airport's extremely complicated and complex. And there's a lot of challenges with it, and one of the challenges you often have is not having support from your community, and this is one of the best supportive communities. And when I talk about the community, I mean everything that we talk about with the Tri-Cities. It's up in Southwest or Southeast Virginia and all of Northeast Tennessee. That community is just tremendous for supporting this airport. I'm really thankful to have come here and found this group of people working together to make something so successful. Tri-Cities Airport started back in 1937. That's a picture that one of my employees found and dug up and put on a slide for me. I think it's pretty cool, but that's what it looked like back when it was the McKellar Airport. And it's been there going ever since then. Of course, quite a few years ago, it got put together as an airport authority. The 5 different entities that separately owned a different piece of the airport got together with the state and formed the law that allowed us to become an airport authority. So now we're an independent organization, but we still have representatives from each city and each county on our board. And so all of you still have a heavy say in what goes on and what happens out at the airport. The airport covers about 1,260 acres. Terminal building is just under 120,000 square feet. We have 2 runways, but only one of them will serve the commercial aircraft right now, and that is an 8,000 foot by 150 foot primary runway. And of course, we serve Northeast Tennessee, Southwest Virginia, Western North Carolina and Eastern Kentucky. We have a real large footprint. Right now we have Allegiant, American, and Delta doing nonstop service. Allegiant, of course, goes to Orlando and seasonally to St. Pete, and then Delta goes to Atlanta, and American goes to Charlotte and Dallas. I'm very happy to say that throughout the COVID issue and the loss of passengers, we haven't lost any of those destinations. And I'm very glad that we haven't. We've been actually performing very well compared to other airports around the country. We're still really under what our normal operations would be, and it's having a huge impact on us, but I'm very happy that we've been able to keep those services going. Believe it or not, the one that's performing the best is the flight to Dallas. That's been performing the best out of everything, so it's a good connection. We got that one about 3 months after I got here, so I was very happy we brought that in, and it's been doing very good. We do have a U.S. Customs port and a foreign trade zone. Those are very good for the economic issues around here. The U.S. port of entry basically means that people can fly into the region and clear customs here at the airport, so you don't have to make another stop if you're flying internationally. So the first question I always get from that is, does that mean we can have international flights on commercial airlines? No, because we don't have the facilities for it. You need a great big huge holding room, you need a place to hold everybody while they're doing the international clearance, and we just don't have that. And then we have a foreign trade zone, which allows businesses that import things from outside of the country to reassemble them here and avoid some of the tariffs you would have if you weren't in a foreign trade zone. And that's actually very good for attracting businesses that bring in international products. And then the other thing that we've done this year is we've started with U.S. Customs to have a global entry enrollment center. So if anybody travels internationally very often, the global entry enrollment center is a great opportunity. But we also find that since those enrollment centers are not easy to get into, we have people from all over the eastern part of the country flying in just to make an appointment at the Global Entry Center. So that's actually been beneficial for us. We have about 28 companies on the airport, and totally there's over 400 employees. This number was before COVID, and we have not, at this point, lost any of the businesses that are on the airport, but I know a few of them have had to cut employees, so we may not have the 400 employees right now. Great news about our economy at the airport and just the economy in Tri-Cities in general. We have been doing really well despite the issues with COVID. When a lot of areas and a lot of places across the country have had dramatic unemployment increases, dramatic losses of income and all that, we have not been impacted as hard as the rest of areas in the country. And that's been helping us in other ways, again, when we're talking about the flights and the number of passengers we have. So it's bad, but the silver lining of that is we're not having it as bad as a lot of other places across the country. Of course, these are the groups that made up the Airport Authority: Sullivan County, Washington County, Bristol, Virginia, Bristol, Tennessee, Kingsport, and Johnson City. And every time I try to talk about those, I try to go in geographical order so there's no favoritism. So if you feel like there was any favoritism, I was trying to go in geographical order. One of the challenges that we have, and this is one of the biggest challenges about operating an airport like we operate, is we are a government entity, but we're required under most laws, federal laws, and then depending on the state you're in, but Tennessee is one of those states, to operate just as if we're a private business. We don't have any tax income, we don't get any money from property tax or sales tax or anything like that. We have to basically be self-supportive and self-sufficient. And that's great and wonderful, except we also have all these rules and regulations that don't allow us to do things. So for instance, I have limitations on what money I can charge people at the airport. I have limitations on how I can spend money. I have limitations on how I can market services. I have all these federal laws that say you have to operate like a business financially, but you can't operate like a business as a normal businessman would run his business. And so it gets challenging. Some of our revenues are, you can see here, 32% of our revenue comes from airline operations. A lot of that is just simply the rent they pay and the amount of money they pay during the year for being at the airport. We actually are challenged with that because to attract new air service, one of the issues they want to know is how much does it cost to operate there. They've got, I'm just going to use some easy, simple numbers. If they've got 10 airplanes and they've got 20 cities that want service, they're going to go to the 10 cheapest cities. And that's one of the things they look for. Or, that's not always exactly it. They'll also look at the cities that'll make them the most money. But if you're tied up on making the most money, but you cost more to operate there, guess who's getting the service? The other airport. So we try to keep that airline revenue actually down lower if we can and find other ways to generate revenue because we want to attract more air service. And then parking revenue is 34% of our operations, or of our revenue. And of course, that's been challenging this year because our parking lot went from, prior to COVID, we were having meetings trying to figure out where we were going to build a new parking lot because our parking lot was constantly full, and that's a great problem to have. And as soon as COVID hit and people stopped flying, I remember the first day I drove up and there were 10 cars in the parking lot. I was very nervous that day. Yes, sir.
You said to ask questions anytime.
Yeah, anytime.
Why is it that your long-term parking is always packed, but you have this huge short-term parking lot that's only maybe about 25% full?
Right now, that's leaning probably a little more that way, but prior to COVID, both parking lots were getting pretty full. But we do charge a little more for the short term, and that does a couple of things. It's a smaller lot, and that encourages people to go park in the longer term parking if they're gonna be away for very long, and frees up the short term for people who are gonna be at a shorter duration. But it also allows us to make more revenue on those people who wanna be up close and are willing to pay a little more for the parking spot. But yeah.
Can't reduce the size of that, so.
The way it's laid out right now would be very difficult. But again, prior to COVID, we were filling up both lots, so it was not much of a problem. I'm not sure what time you were there when you saw the short term being really empty. There are some days that it's more empty than others, but we were at a point where we were hitting about 95% capacity on both lots. So I think right now it is probably portioned off pretty well, hoping that everything comes back to similar numbers prior to COVID. But yeah, no, it's a great question, but it's a way to do two things, is to help just naturally segregate parking, because people are gonna be there for, or they're gonna be gone for 7 days, are gonna be more likely to pay less and go park in the longer term, and that reserves the short term for the people that are just gone for 1 or 2 days and is literally short term. It also gives us the opportunity to generate a little more revenue because, like we said, that's one of the ways we get to run the airport and get to keep things operating. That 8,000 foot, 150 foot wide runway that we use to people for landing, that costs a lot of money each year to maintain and operate and pay for the lighting on and everything. So this revenue to keep that stuff operating is extremely important. Rental cars are our next, and then we get a little bit from general aviation and some other things. I'm always looking for ways to find new revenue. I jokingly told the commissioner once that if it's legal, I'll probably put it at the airport, and if you want to legalize something, let me know and we can figure out how to sell it at the airport. This revenue issue is extremely important. We have challenges all the time trying to figure out how are we going to do the things we need to do to improve, grow, and operate the airport.
Does the
Yes.
recently passed liquor measure in Sullivan County, did you have liquor by the drink?
Yeah, we have, and to be honest, I'm not sure why we fell into a different category, but we have for decades now, so I'm not sure where we fell into a different category. That was before I was here. But yeah, we've had that for quite a while. And that is one of the areas where we're trying to improve. Is concessions is about 2% of our revenue right now, and we're trying to find ways to increase the sales of the restaurant and everything, and we're trying to improve their quality. I'll be the first one to admit that when I got here, the quality of the restaurant and the airport was very, very poor, and we've been trying to work with them to improve the quality. Yes, sir?
Does the casino present much opportunity for you?
The way I like to look at this, because it's going to be difficult to tell until it actually gets here, the casino is going to generate demand for travel into and out of the area. And anytime demand is generated, it's good for the airport. The more people who wanna fly, the more people who need to come in and out of the area, that's better for us. And so the answer is yes. How is that gonna happen? I'm not really sure. Since it's gonna be the Hard Rock Casino that has a lot of music venues and a lot of concert type of things, I'm hoping it's gonna bring people in who wanna come to events such as that, to concerts they have once a month and things like that. And I'm also hoping they'll increase maybe some charter operations and some people that they bring in from outside via charter flights or increased Allegiant Air type flights. That's what I'm hoping for. And again, as it increases demand, it will increase operations. So there will be a benefit. It's just hard to say at this point what that benefit is going to be. So the only exception to we don't get any money, oh, by the way, the other thing I was gonna say is that one of the things that did save us is when the CARES Act grant passed, the airport did get a $10.3 million grant for our operations. Usually any federal money we get is reserved for capital improvements, and specific capital projects will apply for federal money for, say, a runway rehabilitation. We get that money, the only thing we can use it on is that runway rehabilitation or a taxiway improvement or something along those lines. This CARES Act grant was a little different in that it allows us to use that money for any of our operational and maintenance needs. So that was a lifesaver. I was actually literally losing sleep prior to that being passed because I didn't know how I was gonna keep the airport open. There was no way to pencil it out. We were not gonna be able to keep people employed because our revenue went from here to here. And the CARES Act money has given us the ability to continue to operate. If we don't get revenue coming back the way it was prior to COVID, I would say that money will last us 1.5 years. If we start getting our revenue coming back and it starts working, it'll probably last us about 4 years. So it definitely saved us. I'm not a big fan of government giving money to smaller governments to operate, but this time it saved us, and so I'm very happy because it did. Now, the other way that we get money from the FAA is through airport improvement projects, and those are always capital projects. And this is over the last 9 years what we've spent on capital projects. You can see very little of that comes from the airport itself. Then the majority of it does come from FAA funding or state funding. I've talked about some of the challenges we've had. One of the things that is also a challenge is, I told you there's certain ways we can't raise revenue. One of the things is we can't charge people for certain things at the airport. A while back in 1990, Congress passed a law that said we could charge passenger facility charges. So any passenger flying through the airport, we can charge them, this was changed in 2000, up to $4.50 every time they fly out of the airport. And that's limited to 2 stops. So if you buy a ticket, and so say you're flying from here to Dallas to Phoenix, you would get charged $4.50 here and $4.50 in Dallas. And then Phoenix, you don't get charged anything. On your way back, you would get charged from Phoenix and then Dallas and then nothing here. And that's a passenger facility charge. That's a local fee that we keep here at the airport. It doesn't go anywhere else, and we can use that for capital projects at the airport. That's been capped since 2020 at $4.50. You know what hasn't been capped since 2020? The cost of projects. Those keep going up. So we figured, doing the math, we've got about that $4.50 in 2020 dollars, gives us about $1.50 in spending power if you were to look at the inflation between the 2 years. So one of the challenges we've been having is working with, and I say we as in people in my position across the country, trying to get Congress to increase that limitation up to about $8 is what we're hoping for. Long term, that's not going to add a lot to your ticket, but it's going to do a lot on letting us do capital projects at the airport. But again, that's one of those federal limitations we have. And it's a federal limitation, frankly, because the airlines don't like us charging that money and putting it into local development because it increases the ability for us to bring in competition. We want more competition, we want more air service, we want more airlines at the airport. The airlines don't want more competition. They want to keep their monopolies where they can. Prior to COVID, one of the big issues we had was a pilot shortage. I may have talked about this in groups you've been in at before when I first got here, because it's been one of the biggest challenges to getting new air service. There just were not enough pilots for all the different routes the airlines wanted to fly, and there weren't enough people going into the aviation field. COVID's kind of put something on that because, you know, all the aircraft have been grounded, so there's a lot of pilots out there looking for work. But I'm anticipating that as we get past this, airlines start flying again, we start getting a lot more operations going, that we're gonna come back to that same issue again. So that's one of the challenges when you say, well, why don't you just go to United Airlines and get them to come in and bring in flights to Chicago? Well, they would love to. They don't have enough pilots, they don't have enough airplanes, and they wanna go into places where they know they're gonna fill up those seats and make revenue. That's some of the stuff that we deal with when we try to attract new airlines. Prior to COVID in 2019, we had over 421,000 passengers. When we did this slide, we were projecting about 340 or so. I think that number is actually going to come down a little bit lower once we actually get all the real numbers towards the end of the years. But the good news is like I said, we didn't lose any of our flights, and we have talked to a few airlines about improving service here. And believe it or not, because we've performed so well through this COVID crisis, they're actually looking at us and thinking that we might be a good candidate for increased service once things start coming back to normal, because they've seen just how well our community supports the airport. This map's hard to see right here, but what it shows over on this side is where we talk about terms of catchment areas. The yellow area right here is really right in the heart of the Tri-Cities. It's about a 30-minute drive, and that's where the majority of our passengers come from. The green area gets into about a 60-minute drive, and then the blue area is about a 90-minute drive. Down in this area, of course, people are closer to Knoxville. Down in this area, they're closer to Asheville. So we don't expect to get a lot of passengers from this area. We expect most of our passengers to come from this direction right here. And we do these studies and we go to the airlines to try to show them where people are coming from and who's using our services. And it helps us when we talk to the airlines about getting new service. We capture about 48% of the demand. So what we can do is we can get out and we can calculate and we can estimate how many people in those catchment areas want to fly and where are they flying to, that type of thing. We capture about 48% of that. About 21% of them drive to Knoxville, and the other 22% drive to Charlotte, and we lose a little bit to Asheville and a couple of other airports. This is a challenge for us because even with only capturing 48% of our market, we probably prior to COVID were filling up about 90% of our seats. So that means we just didn't have enough seats to capture everybody. So especially the people driving all the way to Charlotte, they just weren't able to buy tickets here. So it's good for us when we go to the airlines and say, hey, we just don't have enough seats in the market. They recognize that they could put more airplanes in here and more larger aircraft or more number of aircraft, and they would fill up those seats. Yes?
You expect that the Bristol casino is going to improve your numbers?
I think so, yeah. That's what I was saying a second ago, is I think that will increase demand. And anytime you increase demand, that gives the airlines reason to bring in more flights and more frequency. So yes, I'm very hopeful about that. Depends on how well they do their job. The casino, that is.
It used to be pretty common for Tyson to be substantially less expensive than here. Has that changed?
So there's several ways to look at that. If you look at our average fare is just all the fares through all three different airlines. Ours is slightly higher. It's really not that much higher. The next way is just it depends answer, and it's what time are you flying, when are you flying, what airline are you flying. So yes, you can at times find cheaper flights going through Knoxville than you can through us. But there's just as many times that you find the cheaper flights going into here. The thing, and this is one of the things I'll go ahead and jump into it now, I was going to say here in a minute. If you want to help our airport, and you want to help this local hometown airport be successful, the number one thing you can do is make sure you're always flying out of this airport instead of flying out of another airport. But we recognize that sometimes that's not practical. if the ticket you find here is $1,200 and you can find one out of Knoxville that's $400, yeah, I totally understand you're gonna drive to Knoxville to do that. But we ask for you to always look here first and check, because just as many times you find the cheaper price in Knoxville, you'll find the cheaper price here. And then we ask you to take into account, your time of driving, how much, it's a lot more convenient to come in and out of here, and to help support your local airport. So, those are the things we ask that you always make sure you check here first and try to make this your opportunity to fly whenever you need to fly. But yeah, we recognize sometimes you'll find cheaper flights at other places, but just remember, you're just as likely to find them cheaper here, so check here first. That's my sales pitch. One of the other challenges that we have, and this is one of the things that it goes into why you fly cheaper prices somewhere. As far back as 1978, right after deregulation, that were the number of major airlines operating across the country. By 1990, it went down to this. By 2000, it was this. And now today, we have 4 main carriers. There's a few other carriers out there, like in the Northwest, you have Alaska Airlines, you have JetBlue up in the Northeast, but really national airline operators operating all over the United States, we're down to 4. And then with a couple of the low-cost carriers like Allegiant. So it's challenging now. These guys now have a monopoly on the system, if you want to be honest, and they can pretty much charge what they want to charge. They don't have as much competition, and they get to rule things like the congressional action for the PSC that would help us improve competition. Those are some of the low-cost carriers that are out there. It's hard to attract the low-cost carriers because they gotta operate at a really low price. They gotta make sure they fill up every flight. They usually tend to look at really big population areas, over 1 million people or more. So we're kind of in that spot where the whole Tri-Cities area that we talk about is that catchment area that I was talking about a few minutes ago. It's about 600,000 people. And so we're about 60% of what these guys typically look at to go into a new market. So we're challenged when we try to get new air service from some of these folks. But we're still there. We've got Allegiant right now. We're trying to get them to grow, and we continue to work on it. I know we're pretty much getting towards the end of it. Real quick, I wanted to say the other big success that we're having right now is we did just come to the point where we did a dedication ceremony for the aerospace park facility at the airport because it is substantially complete. We got a few things to button up next spring, a few pavement projects to finish up in it, but it's actually ready to build. We're working on and looking at companies right now to try to attract out here. Of course, the COVID issue also affected that. Companies that work on aircraft aren't building and expanding when the aircraft are all parked and not moving anywhere. So that's been a challenge. I did bring, if anybody wants one, some of our newest brochures that we're sending out to people promoting Aerospace Park. Also got some of my business cards here if anybody needs them. Any questions? Anything you want to talk about? Anything I forgot? Yes, sir.
Does the aerospace park fall under your responsibility, or is that going to be operated by an independent organization?
That's under my responsibility. Yeah, it's the airport's aerospace park. It was funded through joint operations and raising money from Bristol, Tennessee, Johnson City, Kingsport, and Washington and Sullivan counties, but it's still under our operation and it's still, we manage it. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about prospects for that park? Is anything on the horizon here?
We've had a few prospects. Unfortunately, we had a couple of problems. Is back before COVID, people weren't overly excited to talk to us because the park wasn't finished yet. And who's here has never seen a government project that doesn't get halfway finished and never gets completed? We've all seen it. So when you go out and you talk to these big companies, they're not overly excited to talk to us when the park is only half finished. And then COVID hit. We continued to finish the project, but then that's hit, and these companies that we were talking to, they're not doing anything right now. We have had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks with some companies, which I honestly cannot tell you who they are or exactly what they do, but they would bring in some good businesses and they'd bring in some larger aircraft to operate and work on. And they seem legitimately interested in finding places to expand. Now I say that because we're not the only place to find to expand. There's probably a good 10 or 12 airports across the country that have similar business parks that we compete against. And we are very attractive, but yeah, we're not the only one. For instance, there's one down near Miami that is got a lot of space and a lot of room to build. So if you're looking at a company that wants to be near a large metropolitan area right next to a deep water port, we can't compete with that. If you're looking at somebody who wants to be in a place where cost of living is low, taxes are low, wonderful place to live, we can honestly, we're number one when it comes to that. So there are some companies out there that are looking. Unfortunately, there's just not that many right now, and I anticipate once the airlines start really flying again, we'll start seeing the growth in that industry again. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Sam.
I was, remind me, do you all not have a relationship with Northeast State?
Yeah, we do have we're working with Northeast State, and we're working with them to put in what's called an A&P school. It's an airframe and power plant school. They've had a aviation industries class for quite a while, and people can get an associate's degree in aviation technology, but they've never had a full airframe and power plant certification school, and we're working with them to put that school in right now. The project's trying to get the project started. I just need a lease signed from the state, and as soon as I get that lease signed, I'll get the project going. And hopefully by this time next year, they'll have classes open where people can become certified aircraft mechanics. Yes, sir.
That should be a good selling point.
It's a huge selling point. Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge selling point.
Thank you.
Wonder if you might address the capital requirements that's gonna take this thing to completion. Is it funded halfway, funded completely? Where does the funding come from?
So the funding for the infrastructure that we've already developed is complete. That came from 3 primary sources. There's a few smaller sources, but it came from state funds that we get both through fuel taxes that are raised in the state and through an economic development fund that came from the state. A little portion from airport improvement program monies that we were eligible to use on this. And then the largest portion was the Sullivan County, Washington County, Kingsport, Bristol, Tennessee, and Johnson City all went together on a bond issue to raise $8 million for us for this project. And that's really what allowed us to complete the infrastructure project. So turning those rolling hills that were out there, if you've been out on Hamilton Road around the backside of the airport, even 2 years ago when I first got here, it was rolling hills and valleys and rivers. I mean, it was beautiful, but it was no place you could build anything, and it is flat now. It is flat ground. I've told somebody when we did the dedication ceremony, I've never been so excited to talk about flat ground. It was amazing. But seeing the amount of work that our teams did, that was just tremendous. All the utilities are put in, all the drainage, all the sewage, all the water, electricity, phone, gas, everything is out there ready to go. Like I said, come springtime, the only thing we have to do is get a few paving projects finished. And again, all of that is funded. What we don't have funding for right now is to invest in any vertical infrastructure. And that's one of the challenges. So I've got land to build. If you want to come in and build a 300 by 300 foot hangar to put in a aircraft refurbishing center, I've got the land for you to build it. If you want me to build the building for you, that's where I'm challenged. And there are some companies out there that want us to build the building for them, and we have a challenge with that because we don't have the capital to build a $20 million hangar. But for the companies that have that, or if there's other ways we can partner with them, we're ready to go. But yeah, so for your funding question, that's where the challenge is for those companies that want us to have existing sites or build a suit for them.
I'm sorry, but they sometimes use tax incentive type financing around town. Is there anything like that that's an option for out there at the airport?
Yeah, we're working with the Economic Development Corporation. For those of you who know Clay Walker over there, we work with him to help bring in both prospects for that park. Yeah, the networks people. We're working with him constantly on that, and he's always providing us the information on the incentives that are available. Yes, sir.
There were some peripheral businesses that, well, Bell Helicopter used to have are those businesses still out there?
Bell Helicopter still has a very big operation out in Piney Flats. They don't need the runways, so they operate out in Piney Flats. And then we've got a few other smaller companies that are still out there. Like I said earlier, there's 28 businesses out on the airport. None of them are super huge, but they're all very active and they've all survived so far. So that's the other thing that's challenging about this COVID issue. I used to be able to tell you things that happened a few months ago and predict what was gonna happen the next few months because things were pretty consistent and stable. Nothing is stable right now. So I can look back and tell you what happened a month ago. I'm guessing as much as anybody else is when I tell you what's gonna happen in the next few months because everything has just become so unstable in the COVID world. Thank you all for having me here, and I'll hang around if you have more questions or want to talk about anything.